Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to read chapters 3 and 4 from the Magic Treehouse series, book number 11, Lions at Lunchtime. So remember, just like we talked about last time, I want you to constantly be thinking about what you're reading, making predictions about what you haven't read yet, and pretending to be one of the characters and think about how they might be feeling and why they're feeling that way. So today we're going to pick up where we left off. Annie and Jack had just arrived in the safari, and Annie went down to try to save the wild beast, or as we know them, they're called wildebeests. And he just got down off the ladder, but he's really concerned because he has yet to see any lions. And the riddle was this: I'm the color of gold and as sweet as can be, but beware of the danger that's all around me. What am I? So that's what we're trying to figure out so that they can help Morgan solve her third riddle. Chapter 3 today is called Disaster. So think about what that word means. A disaster is when something goes really, really wrong. Like if I just made a lovely dinner and I was carrying it to the table and then I dropped it, I might say, ugh, that's a disaster. I just made all this food and now it's all over the floor and I have to throw it in the trash. So that's kind of like a smaller disaster, but sometimes some large disasters happen. Like if there's a really bad hurricane or a flood that knocks down people's houses, that would be a disaster too, because it causes a lot of damage. Okay, let's see what kind of disaster Annie and Jack face in this chapter 3. Come on, Jack, Annie called. She was almost to the river. Just a minute, he shouted. He wanted to study the giraffes and zebras. He pulled out the Africa book and found a picture of giraffes. He read, The giraffe is the tallest animal in the world. Its legs alone can be 6 feet tall, and its hooves can be as big as dinner plates. The giraffe has a very powerful kick, which makes it dangerous to attack. For this reason, lions tend to avoid giraffes. So avoid means stay away. So lions don't mess with giraffes because of their powerful kicks. So Jack pulled out his notebook and wrote, Notes on Africa. Lions avoid giraffes. He turned the page and read more. Zebras live in family groups, as no two zebras have exactly the same pattern of stripes. Every baby zebra must learn its own mother's pattern. Jack studied the zebras, trying to see their different patterns. But in the hazy afternoon light, all the stripes just made him dizzy. He blinked to clear his head, then read more. Zebras are the first to cross the river because they eat the corsets grass. After they've thinned down the top layer, the wildebeests arrive and eat the next layer. They prepare the grass for the gazelles who come last. Wow, thought Jack. Each animal depends on the one that goes before. He wrote, All animals are connected. Jack heard Annie shouting from the river. Jump, beast, jump! You can do it! Don't be afraid! Come on! He looked up. Annie herself was jumping as she called to the wildebeest. Jack sighed. I'd better stop her before there's trouble, he thought. He put away the Africa book and his notebook. Then he jogged toward the river. His pack was heavy and lumpy, bumping against his back. He'd forgotten to take out the jar of peanut butter and the loaf of bread. Jack decided to leave them at the treehouse. He turned to go back. But just then, Annie's shouting stopped. Jack looked at the river. She had vanished. Annie? He called. No answer. Where was she? Annie! Jack shouted. She had completely disappeared. "Oh, man," said Jack. Their trip had barely begun, and already disaster had struck. He forgot about the stuff in his pack. He just ran as fast as he could. He wove his way between the grazing zebras and giraffes as he raced to the river. "Help!" called Annie. So now we know why the chapter was called Disaster. What problem did Annie and Jack just encounter? If you said that Annie is stuck, we don't know what happened to her. I don't know if she fell in the water. I don't know if a wildebeest got a hold of her. But it's definitely a disaster, and now Jack has to go help save his sister. So chapter 4 is called Mud Bath. Jack looked over the edge of the riverbank. Annie had fallen into a pool of mud near the water. The thick black mud was up to her chest. "I slipped," she said. "It feels like quicksand." Jack threw down his pack and got on his knees. So I don't know if you've ever heard about quicksand, but quicksand is sand that has a lot of water in it. And when somebody or an animal steps into it, they sink. Maggie, come on. And they can't escape. And it's supposed to just suck them down into the sand. "Be careful," said Annie. "Don't slip too." Jack pointed to a tangle of old tree roots sticking out of the bank. "Grab those," he said. Annie reached for the roots. "Too far," she said, breathing hard. I'm sinking." She was sinking. The mud was up to her neck. "Hold on." Jack looked around wildly. He saw a fallen tree branch near the bank. He raced to it, picked it up, and carried it back to Annie. Only her head and arms stuck out of the mud now. Jack held out the branch. Annie grabbed it. "Hold tight," said Jack. "I'll drag you over to the roots." He started pulling on the branch. "I'm still sinking," Annie wailed. The mud was up to her chin. "Come on," said Jack. "You can do it. I know you can. Try. Just then, Jack heard a splash. He looked up. What do you think made that splash sound? On the other side of the wide river, a wildebeest had jumped into the water. Another jumped, then another. They were headed right toward Jack and Annie. "Hold tight," said Jack. He pulled the stick again. Annie moved a tiny bit. "Hey, Jack, on the moon, it felt like I weighed 10 pounds, said Annie. "And in this mud, it feels like I weigh a ton." Good math word. Ton. Do you think that's a lot or little? A ton is a lot, so if you said a lot, you were right. "Concentrate, Annie," said Jack, trying not to slip down the bank. "I am." The lead wildebeests were halfway across, swimming toward them. Many more wildebeests were jumping into the water. "It's now or never," said Jack. He took a deep breath. And he pulled really hard. Just then, a shadow passed over them. Jack looked up. "Uh-oh," he said. A huge vulture circled overhead. "It thinks you're near the end," said Jack. That means that the vulture thinks that Annie's almost dead. "Oh, get out of here," Annie shouted at the vulture. "I'm fine." In a burst of fury, she let go of the branch. She lunged for the roots. She grabbed them. "Yes!" cried Jack. "Pull, pull!" Slowly, Annie pulled herself out. She was covered with black mud from head to toe. Jack helped her onto the bank, getting mud all over himself. "See?" Annie shook her fist at the vulture. "I'm fine. Now beat it." But the giant ugly bird still circled. "Come on, let's get away from him," said Jack. He pushed his glasses into place. "Rats," he said. Now his glasses were muddy. He tried to clean his hands in the grass. "Oh shouted Annie. Jack turned to her. The wildebeest will get stuck in the mud hole, she cried. She waved her arms at the wildebeest, struggling to swim across the river. Not here, she shouted, not here. But the frantic swimmers kept coming. So here's the picture from the end of that chapter. Jack's finishing rescuing Annie, and the wildebeest are headed right towards the quicksand mud. All right, some interesting stuff has happened. They avoided a disaster. So next time we meet, we're going to read chapters 5 and 6. Can't wait.